right, the reason we did this is just to fill up some time. We're not going to use these. No, not sure we are. We do want to start with some questions that we have that we think are appropriate and that are relevant to what we've been talking about. I like this team, and Keith is going to lead us in some of these questions. Keith is from the Northwest, and Keith's a person that I met in Portland, and I was really impressed when I met him. Not an imposing person, not a person that just bears himself on you, but somebody that's a listener and a reflective person. And so, Keith, I've appreciated that. And so, tell us a little bit about where you are, and then introduce the rest of these guys.
Okay. Well, my name is Keith Weiser. I'm lead pastor of Resonate Church, which is in Pullman, Washington, at Washington State University, and over in Moscow, Idaho, at the University of Idaho. And I was a BCM model guy. Was there for 3 years, and then we began to morph what we had into a collegiate church. In that setting, we had a multi-generational church that was very healthy in our town, but we kind of came to the conclusion that there was people that would never go to that, no matter how healthy that multi-generational church was. And so we set out to plant the church that would be reaching the people that would never come to that multi-generational church. And so that started in 2007. And so we are kind of a balance between missional and attractional, and I've seen some significant growth numerically in that. We started off at Washington State University, then started another multi-site kind of thing over in the University of Idaho, 8 miles away. And so we have a large staff. Most of them volunteer, or all of them volunteer in some capacity. We don't pay a full salary at all. But that's a little bit of what we're doing. We're starting to train up and create a church planting school right now, and looking to launch them within the next year. So that's just a little bit of our background. And as I say some of these concerns, that kind of are answer some of the concerns and stuff like that comes out of that context. So I'm going to turn it over to Victor. He's going to tell you a little bit about his context and where he's planning and what that looks like.
I'm in Vancouver, BC, and I'm on a campus called Simon Fraser University. We currently run 2 services, although we just launched 2 new ones in different locations. We've got a morning service that has a lot of families that live around the area, and then an evening service. And we use the evening service really to plant the morning service component. A lot of students run what happens in the morning, and then we should have services, celebrations, life groups, and then ministry teams. And we encourage students to get plugged into all of those. And we just launched 2 new sites in different parts of the city, and just taking some of our student leaders, and they run in with those parts.
My name is Brian Wiles. I am the pastor at H2O Church in Bowling Green, Ohio, not Kentucky. Bowling Green, Ohio, and that church has actually been there for 25 years. So kind of a rare breed when it comes to college-focused churches, because it's had a long history there, and we have a real heart to be a sending church. We've sent a number of campus-focused churches over the last few years on church plants. One of the guys, Jason Slack, is with us and planted 2 years ago at Kent State. We just launched a new church plant at the University of Cincinnati a couple months ago, and have done some things overseas in Amsterdam and Orlando, Florida, and even Columbus, Ohio as well, down at Ohio State with Ed. So that's kind of the perspective that I'll be coming from, as a college-focused church that is looking to reproduce and multiply and send church plants out to other college campuses.
My name's Mike McQuitty. I've been at Syracuse for about 14 years. We also kind of accidentally began a church plant, and it has kind of morphed into that, and now started other ones on nearby state campuses, Oswego State, Portland State, and so we're still wrestling with that, but kind of trying to follow that model that you guys have been doing for a long time.
I'm Robert Pinkston. I'm in my 10th year in Quebec as planting churches. One of the distinctions is that I work mostly in French. I planted a church in Montreal with a team in 2000, and then in 2005 moved to a new city called Sherbrooke, and 2 years ago launched Renaissance Church. It's different than the church I planted in Montreal, in that this church from the outset was trying to be multi-generational, trying to reach students but also families at the same time. While most of the people in the church are students, we do have families and children and things like
Right. One of the things that's for us is we've been talking about this. I feel like we've kind of drifted into this topic over and over. A lot of the things that we've discussed have touched on this, and so I've heard from us inside and from people that are talking about this outside some significant things. We're going to try to rekindle some of the conversations maybe we had in our groups, and then try to even push some of this further to some of the questions that maybe we haven't even brought up yet, but we're going to have to address at some point. So to these guys, I want to just kind of start off. I've heard it said in a few different ways, but is collegiate church planting, and when we begin to do this and focus on what is happening there, are we just breeding consumerism? Is this what we call relevance really just causing them to have a self-focused thing? If that's a concern or a critique, respond to that in your kind of understanding of whether the pursuit of relevance is breeding consumerism.
I think one of the issues, at least for us, is that's actually the topic of our sermon this Sunday coming up. So we're talking about, hey, don't just go to the church you like. You go where you can invest and some things like that, as part of a series of where sometimes our own culture clashes with what Christ calls us to. But I do think we have to start somewhere. And I think we heard this kind of in the last session about the idea of this is sort of that missional, missionary, apostolic kind of ministry where you are going to where the people are and able to reach them. One of the things I'm very excited about the fact that we have church on campus is that we get so many non-Christians coming through because they don't feel like they have to go to a place and they feel very comfortable getting up and leaving in the middle of it. This is an auditorium that's on their campus. They walk there from their dorm. They don't feel trapped. So they feel more comfortable in coming. So I think that's one of the purposes. That although this may feed some of your consumerism, that is your culture, and we're trying to at least connect where you are. We don't want to leave you there, but at least it's a starting point.
I would agree, and I think even, I would just view it as contextualizing the gospel in a certain sense. I mean, that is, the stage of life that these college students are in. So obviously there's always a danger with that, but at the same time, I think I really don't see it too much different than what a community church would struggle with. If you want to do things with excellence, you can always have that I guess, we call it the razor's edge, where, you can fall off one end and just, fall into this consumer mentality. And yet at the same time, if we're going to put together a church plan on a college campus, we don't want it to stink. We want it to be something that people would enjoy coming to. We want it to be something that is contextualized and that students will relate with and understand and resonate with. And so I think you have to fight it, but at the same time, I don't see it being much different than the things that many of our brothers in community churches would deal with as well.
I think there's a danger of falling into consumerism, but I think what we're doing is no different than what a missionary would do. I grew up in West Africa as a missionary kid, and I watched my dad as he would learn the language, he would learn the customs of the people, he would try to be very contextual in his approach to the people. But his goal was not just to attract them to maybe a sermon under a mango tree. His goal was to transform their lives through Jesus Christ. And so I think we have to really see, what is our goal? Are we just trying to attract students so that we can feel good? Or is it because we want to change lives? And so I think, as we have vision and as we know what we're doing, we can actually steer the students away from just coming to receive. That would just be anemic, but we need to challenge them to living out for Christ.
Yeah, I know we encourage our guys to be serving. If they're not serving, then we ask them, why aren't you serving? So we're not like a cruise ship, we're all about being a mercy ship, and you need to be serving. And a lot of our guys are serving and reaching people for Jesus, and most of the people that come into our church aren't Christians. And coming along and come to know the Lord, and so, it's definitely got to be serving.
Well, in taking this kind of the next step, we talked about this a little bit in the previous session. Is collegiate church hurting the transition out of the collegiate context? Is that something that we're causing that kind of suffer? Does it hurt what happens to the student as they leave the confines of the collegiate church, the collegiate experience? Respond to that a little bit, and those concerns.
I mean, not if we do it well and disciple people. I mean, I was totally resonating with what Ed said, that our goal is to make missionaries and make disciples, and that doesn't matter where they are. And so if they're on our campus, we're going to teach them how to do it in a campus setting, and yet the exact skill set may not carry over into when they're working a job or in a different city, but the principles and the general biblical foundation for discipleship, outreach, living a life that is immersed in the culture and yet set apart, as a follower of Christ, that stands out, and that does translate and carry over. And so, do we lose some people? We do. But again, I mean, I don't see it too much different. I mean, if someone lives in a town and is part of a community church and they move to a new town, there's often times where you'll find 40, 50, 60-year-olds who don't jump right from one church to another church when they transition. And so I think part of the reason why some of those statistics are so high is because there's just more of it. There's more transition. And so I think if we do our job well, it doesn't hurt that transition. It actually helps a lot.
One of the benefits that from longevity, I feel like, is you can see places where you've had success and places where you've had failure. And looking back, I think I learned a big lesson in this area was from the first generation of students, the ones that helped, and we really wrestled with, should we launch a church? Should we become a church? Okay, who's going to be the music leaders? How are going to structure things? Those students that helped launch the church, I mean, we're talking 10, 12 people that were involved. Every one of them, to the person, got involved when they left. One's a church planter in Boston. Two others, they got married later, were part of a church plant in New York City. They're still there. They're planning to launch their second church. Another one got involved in one of the Antioch church plants in Boston. Another one did a church plant in Washington, D.C. It's like every single one of them got involved in a mission project, launched a youth group at a church, or became part of a church plant. They all went to they were like, well, we planted a church at college. We can do, The second generation of students, it was not the same. We didn't have the same emphasis, I guess, because we weren't new anymore. People were just kind of carrying on what was going on. And I feel like I realized something, that if I'm not teaching start, new, growth, that it really can be something where the students don't transition well and are just saying, well, I can't find a church that's for me. But if I'm teaching and everything's about where's the next place we're going, how are we preparing you to be those missionaries, they're looking for those spots, and they make very, very good church planters and very good ministers in churches that are doing something that need their skills. Otherwise, I think I'm failing if I try to prepare them just to fit into a traditional church.
I think part of our role is preparing tomorrow's church leaders. And so if students are, when they're graduating and moving out, if they're not plugging into another church somewhere, I think we're failing along the way. I think a lot of the students that we reach, at least in my context, are unchurched. And one reason why they're unchurched is because they're turned off to the church, especially up in Quebec. But as they're in our church, I think one of my roles is to really show them that they need to be kingdom Christians, and that wherever they go, they need to be a leader in a church, whether it be traditional or some other type of church.
What do you say to the student that comes back to you and says, when they leave, hey, I haven't found a church because there's just I don't like any of the churches? How do you respond to that? If someone was to come back and say that in response to go and find a church?
Well, I would usually tell them that they should pray that God sends a like-minded group and that they start a church. But also I encourage them that even if it's a church that they don't like, it's not really about them. That they should really get in that church and serve in the church.
We actually do a thing for seniors to transition. That's one of our models. And so we actually don't have students that could ever come back and say that. And the reason is because I tell our seniors as they're leaving, if you come back and say those very words to me, I realize I've failed. And you failed to get it. You failed for it to make sense to you that you're not going to find a place.